Hi, I'm Phil from Braking Cycles. Today's video is about roadside repairs and how to avoid having to do them. The most common roadside repair that we're going to come into when we're riding a bike is a puncture. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a few different situations. You can see here I've got my e-bike, a mountain bike and a road bike. So I'll show you slightly different methods and how it differs between different types of rides, different types of bikes. The next part of this video will be out on the road and we'll show you what happens in a real situation.
Puncture. Yeah, clear.
We've stopped at the side of the road because I have a rear wheel puncture. I'm going to show you how to fix that and what you need. If you're riding with someone else, as you can see, earlier I was riding with Phil. You also use your mate. You might have the sort of mate who wants to help you. You might have the sort of mate who gets the camera out and wants to start filming. Hi Phil.
Hiya.
So the first thing is getting the wheel out. The wheel will come out much more easily if the chain is in this small cog, small sprocket, because that releases the tension on that chain. So the first thing I'm going to do is change up my gears and spin the wheel round. Then I need to release the quick release on my brake. So that is round here at this side, and that just opens up the brake pads a little bit wider. I undo my quick release, a couple of turns to make sure it's off, and as I lift up, the wheel comes out quite easily. You'll notice at no point do I turn the bike upside down. I'm just going to lie it down on its side, chain up. That prevents the chain from getting tangled. This is the point where I have to take the gloves off and get cold. What I'm going to use to fix this, because we're looking at a quick fix, is putting a new inner tube in, which I have here. I'm going to use a CO2 pump to re-inflate it. And I have a single tyre lever. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is punctured. It's gone very spongy, but it's not completely empty. So I'm going to open up the valve and let the last bit of air out. Starting with the valve, I'm going to pinch the tyre together and just remove it from the rim. And we'll work that all the way around and make sure I've done it on both sides. I'm then going to push that rim into that tyre bead into the middle of the rim. See how much space I can create at this side, and hopefully I'll be able to create a small gap. This one doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get that off with just my fingers, so I'm going to use the tyre lever opposite the valve. Put that in, lift it over. You'll notice that these tyre levers are plastic. That means they will be a lot less likely to damage the rim or the bead of the tyre. And I push it all the way around. I can now take the punctured inner tube out. This is where that friend, if you've got one, comes in. So to save me a minute later, I'm going to throw that to my friend. This is a new one going in. Some people like to fix inner tubes, some people like to throw them away and start again. That's entirely your choice. I like to take the tyre off completely and turn it inside out, starting with the logos. So you can see a little orange logo there. Turn it inside out and have a look inside. That prevents me from cutting myself if I start rubbing my finger inside blindly. So you never know what you've run over and caused the puncture. So I think I can see the source of it there. there's a little bit of damage, but there's nothing sticking through. I can just check that with my nail or with the end of the tyre lever. But I'm going to carry on checking anyway, because finding one hole doesn't mean there isn't a second. But in this case, I've got back around to my logo and it's fine. Double check if you feel the need, entirely up to you. My fingers are getting cold and I want to put my gloves back on, so I'm going to do this quickly. Being conscious of tyre direction, I refit the tyre. That's an argument for leaving one side on the rim. There's an arrow which should be pointing forward. I like to start with the wheel in between my legs so I can look down and think, right, that's where the cassette should be. Always good to line up the logo with the valve hole. For one, it looks cooler. But secondly, it makes it easier to find your valve. So now a little bit fiddly. You can always ask your friend to help you. And you have to hold that in place. Taking the valve cap off. I'm not going to use that because it's not dusty in the UK in the winter, it's wet. So we don't want to trap wet in, and we don't have much dust to keep out. So that'll stay in my pocket. Open up my valve and feed it through the hole. From there, just gently fill into all the gaps before starting to refit. The reason that we avoid using tyre levers at all costs to put the tyre back on is that we run the risk of pinching the inner tube. So I'm going to show you a technique in just a minute for making sure the tyre seats properly without having to force it with a lever. So I'm at that point. I can see I'm at the tight bit, I can't just find that. So what I'm going to do is lean it against the floor and I'm going to start rolling over with the heels of my hands, not my fingers. And what that's doing, I'm warming up the edge of the tyre, making it more likely to go on. Still really tight. I need to create more space. I can do that by thinking about making sure that that rim, the beads are in the middle of the rim all the way around, so I can pinch all the way around again. And that gives me a bit more space. So just gently rolling it over one bit at a time will eventually pop into place. Press the valve, make sure it's open, push back in. We're going to put a can of CO2 in. You can see on here, I've wrapped that with gaffer tape, which means I've always got some gaffer tape with me. You'll see later I like gaffer tape. It also means that when this cartridge gets cold, it doesn't freeze my fingers. This one's got a valve, so I'm going to make sure it's closed when I put it on. And then I'm going to screw this onto the valve. Some pumps might push. So I've got my valve fitted. That's been stored in my pocket with the canister closed. I'm going to pierce it now just by screwing it in. So screw it in until it feels tight and I just back it off about a quarter of a turn. Then I can hold it by the gaffer tape or the sleeve and open the valve. Which inflates my tyre, pumping it up nice and hard. Unscrew, tighten up. Get your mate to put your tools in his pocket so you can get going quicker.
Missed.
Holding my bike with one hand. Seat post's a good place to hold. Nice and stable. Bring my wheel back round. I'm aiming to get the chain to sit on the small cog. So long as it sits on the cassette and not on the skewer, it's going to be fine. So it'll sit on there. Let that come past. And it sits in quite nicely. So just letting it hang into the right place before tightening up. Tightening up the skewer, I'm going to use the back of my hand, my palm, to just push it over. And I should see a small little indent, but not painful. Just show me it's about tight enough. Pedal forward to get the chain back on. Change to an appropriate gear. And then I'm ready to set off again. Once I've fastened up that quick release, check that brake. Okay, so time to pack away and get moving. So as you can see, I've got a puncture on the electric bike and I found a safe place to fix it. I've got a puncture on here. I'm usually going to be on my way to somewhere, so I want to do it dead quick. So this is why I always use my foam. That bit, held it on, so I'm going to put that in my pocket. So I've got my can of foam here and I just need to look on there. It's got an adapter for a Presta valve. These are a Schrader valve, so I'm going to unscrew that. Put it in my pocket because I don't need it. So all I need to do to pump it up is remove the valve cap and give this a shake for a good few minutes and then empty it in. When I say give it a shake for a good few minutes, I mean for a good few minutes. Right, so I think that should be shaken up well enough. So I'm just going to check that there's no kinks in the tube that are going to stop the foam from flowing through. Take the cap off the top so it'll empty out. Screw the end of the hose onto the inner tube valve. Turning the can upside down. Release the foam. So you can see that this isn't instant. It takes a little while for the foam to empty out of the can. But the tyre's becoming firmer now, and that's nearly hard enough to get me home. So what I'll do with this is I've fixed it, I've done my emergency repair. I'll get myself home, or I'll get myself to the bike shop and then look at whether it needs fixing properly. There's even some foam left in the can. It's just a case of putting my valve cap back on there. And continuing my journey. We've looked at dealing with a puncture on a road bike by changing the inner tube and using a CO2 inflator. We've also looked at using foam in a can to repair a puncture without having to take the wheel off, which we did using the electric bike. That's really good when there is a reason, like a motor in the hub or a dynamo or hub gearing, that makes it difficult for you to get the wheel in and out. What we haven't covered that might be relevant is dealing with disc brakes and with bolt through axles. So you might have bolt through axles where the axle runs right through, like on this. That's quite common in newer mountain bikes. You might also physically have a bolt on the side, in which case you'll need to carry an adjustable spanner. To show you how to take this wheel out, you'll see on this one there are Allen bolts at both sides. The smaller side is looking for a 5mm Allen key, which is here. It is quite tight because I want the wheel to stay in. With this type of axle, the whole thing slides out. Top tip, keep it all together. Nothing worse than losing the bit that stops it falling to bits. And as soon as you lift the forks, the wheel comes out. So when it comes to putting it back in, what we need to do is make sure that we line up the disc correctly. So I'll hold the front of my bike by the stem, or maybe even by the top of the fork, and I'm looking at it over the top and looking down to make sure that the rotor or the disc slides into the brake caliper. When that's lined up, I can refit my axle. Making sure at the end to get this bolt nice and tight. Again, it's no fun having a loose front wheel. You shouldn't need to make any adjustments to things on your bike as you're riding around normally. But if you've had a bit of an incident or something's been lent against your bike whilst you've been at work or in a shop, you might find that things get nudged. Classic examples of this are brake levers coming loose after an accident that may be like this, in which case you would find the relevant tightening bolt, line up to where we want to be, and tighten up. You'll notice here on this mountain bike, these are loose enough to move with some pressure but not freely moving. That is so that the lever moves rather than braking if it hits anything. You may also find after a fall or a crash that your handlebars end up not being straight, in which case you need to tighten them up. You may have an Allen key bolt on the top of your stem, on the top of your steerer tube, where it's going into the stem, or you may have bolts here. Either way, we straighten the wheel by holding it in between your legs, like we do when we're checking it for the M check. Shift it back down, and I'm looking directly down, getting it as straight as I can. The same thing may also be true of your seat post collar, axles, in which case it's always a good idea, if you're setting off again, to perform that M check, which is in the preparing to ride video. The other common roadside incident would be a chain coming off. Rather than demonstrating what you do to put a chain back on, this is really a how do you prevent that happening in the first place. If your chain is coming off your bike, then there is an issue either with the chain tension or with the way that your derailleurs have been set. This bike being a single speed bike, the chain will stay on so long as the tension's right. and everything's lined up. If it's coming off, it's an issue with setup and it needs to go to a bike mechanic to be sorted out. If you have a bike with gears and the chain comes off whilst you're riding, this is because something's not been set up correctly in your derailleur, and that again is a bike shop issue. So you've seen out on the road how we deal with our mechanicals and punctures as and when they happen. I'm going to show you what I like to carry when I'm out on a ride on a particular type of bike. So we've got here a road bike. So the idea of going on a road ride is we want things to be fast and light. So all of the tools that I'd carry will be in this little box here. So I'm just going to lay some things out on the floor. So we've got the bottle that you saw on the bike, a spare inner tube, set of tyre levers, a CO2 pump that will fix one puncture, a mini pump that will top it up, fix a second puncture, a spare chain link. Be careful, you have to buy the right one for your chain, and a multi-tool. You're going to see 3 different multi-tools. This one is quite a good one. It has a chain tool, which will help you with fixing a chain, range of Allen keys, screwdrivers, it's even got a bottle opener. So that covers pretty much every eventuality that you're going to come up against in a road ride. Moving over to my mountain bike. Obviously I'm going to be in situations that are a bit more remote here. So what I carry is going to be a little bit different. And it's all in that bag, which I'm going to empty out on the floor. So you can see what I'm carrying here. The rucksack has space in for water, spare clothes, first aid kit, bits of food. All of these things become a little bit more important if I'm going off-road and getting a bit more remote, because I might need to be more self-sufficient. Similar to the road bike, I've got a inner tube, a multi-tool, and a pump. I've actually got 2 pumps here. This is a high pressure shock pump that might be needed on a mountain bike with air suspension. It has some gaffer tape wrapped around the shaft of that pump, which is the reason I'm carrying it, because this bike doesn't even have suspension. Gaffer tape's really useful. You can fix a whole range of things, from tears in tyres to cable casing, bits of clothing, all sorts of things. Got me out of a lot of tight spots, and the same can be said for cable ties, which is something else I always carry. This pump is a bit bigger and heavier duty for pumping up a big chunky mountain bike tyre, but obviously a lot bigger to carry, so I'm not going to want to put that on my road bike. This multi-tool has a couple of chain links on the back of it, tyre lever, screwdrivers, range of Allen keys, and very cleverly, in its 2 parts, fits together as a chain splitter, like that. Both the road bike and the mountain bike kits there are really for someone who knows what they're doing a little bit. This is my everyday bike that I ride all the time, and if I get a puncture on this, if I have an issue, I'm going to need to sort it out quickly. So this is where avoiding becomes much more important. All I carry for a short trip on here is this can of foam and a very simple multi-tool. Got 2 screwdrivers, a range of Allen keys, and there's pretty much everything that you could possibly need to tighten up or adjust something during a ride, which is all you're going to need to do. The places that we get punctures are usually the edges of the road, in the gutter. You need to watch the road positioning video again to recap on that. These tyres, big, chunky and heavy, they're very, very puncture resistant. That also helps, so the choice of tyres that you use affects your chance of getting a puncture. Before I go out on my ride, I always make sure I do a check. So again, we can refresh on the M checks from the Preparing to Ride video and have a look at that. If we perform those regularly, make sure we've checked our headset, our seat clamp, our wheels, then we're much, much less likely to need to get this out.